Hello there, everybody. Here's a quick book review of the Aeneid by Vergil. And this particular version is put out by Barnes & Noble Classics series of books. Now, this is a great story. This, of course, is an epic poem. Epic poetry is not my usual fare, as you can tell looking through my video history and some of the books that I have reviewed so far. Now, this one follows along in the vein of the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. And then about 700 years later, along comes Vergil writing the Aeneid. The Aeneid tells the story of a man named Aeneas. He's one of the survivors of the Trojan War. The city of Troy was destroyed by the Greeks, and some of the people got away, being led by Aeneas. And they wander around the Mediterranean for several years before being washed up on the shore of Carthage and finding their way into the very court of Queen Dido herself, Queen of Carthage. And Aeneas has a decision to make. Can he accept the hand of Dido in marriage and thus inherit a great kingdom in Carthage, or continue on to found his own city? This is a very interesting book, and some of the themes covered by this are duty, honor, selflessness, fathers and sons, and thoughtful devotion versus the bloodlust of total war. And of course, fate steps in from time to time to drive Aeneas and drive the plot forward. And of course, the gods may have some petty uses for Aeneas as well. This particular version of this book is helpful because it does have some introductory information about Vergil himself. And of course, as every book should, a table of contents, but this talks about the world of Vergil and the Aeneid. This was written in the time of Caesar Augustus, the first real true emperor of Rome. Augustus's uncle had been Julius Caesar, who was a dictator, but was cruelly knifed by some members of the Senate. Et tu, Brute? And of course, his nephew Octavian, taking the moniker Augustus, became the actual first emperor of Rome. And the rest is history, as they say. And Augustus was, of course, the emperor on the throne at the time of Jesus' birth. But this was finished about 19 BC. This took Vergil 10 years to write. He finished it about 20 years, 19 years before Christ, somewhere in that vicinity. And what some people have suggested in the past is that there are some fairly Christian themes in here that kind of allude to, was Vergil some kind of, closet Jew or something like that? Did he sympathize with the religion of Israel? And it's only because there are some similar values to consider. The idea of an eternal city, the idea of an eternal ruler, a king whose kingdom has no end, whose kingship has no end. Some of those things are touched on in this book. But of course, those things are not found in a mere man. And that is, of course, speculation on the part of the reader as to what Vergil was trying to convey. But we have, helpful in this book is some major characters and places of the Aeneid, and then the gods and places that are helpful to know. And I found myself referring back to this once in a while and wishing that this list were a little bit longer. And there's a note on the translation. Now, this particular translation was done by Christopher Cranch, and Edgar Allan Poe spoke very highly of this translation. I found myself, while reading this book, I had to read some of it out loud. It's too good to not speak out loud, much of it. Poetry's meant to be heard, not just read in your head, right? And you'll want to be able to do that. And there's 12 books that this book is divided into, and it takes about an hour to read each. So in about 12 hours, you can read this whole book. But you might want to do some additional background research. There's a lot of great videos on YouTube that give you some interesting information. Maybe you have some books on Rome available to you at the library you can look at. just to get some more information about this. So you might spend several hours in research just understanding the world in which Vergil was writing, and about the world in which Aeneas exists. And so here's a map. I found myself referring to this often as well. And over here is Troy, where the story began for Aeneas. And then, but actually book 1 starts at Carthage. And then Aeneas tells the whole story of how he got there. And then he moves forward, leaving Carthage a few books later and coming eventually to Italia. And that's his destiny, right? So Aeneas is in the line of founders of Rome, and that's why he's such a big deal to Romans. So Roman people had already known about Aeneas and his ties to Rome's founding, and it was one of their founding myths, and they generally believed it. And it's a good story. So when Vergil sat down to write this epic poem, he's writing a story that people already are familiar with, and he's building off of the Iliad and the Odyssey, stories people also knew very well. And I don't mean just the educated, the highly educated among Rome's elite. I mean the people knew these stories, and he had to take great care with this. Caesar Augustus, as I understand it, was a big fan of what he read from Vergil. And there's a question of, was Vergil critiquing Caesar Augustus in some of these lines? Maybe. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. We don't have Vergil here to ask, so we can't know for sure. But there is some pretty good videos out there explaining why that might be the case. And you can look them up yourself. I'm not going to necessarily recommend one video or another. And then another helpful tool in this book is endnotes. So you might want to read the endnotes before you even read one of the books. So on book 1, before you read it, maybe read this. Yes, this will be spoilers. But again, remember, the Romans already had most of the spoilers anyway. They already knew the story. Being told in this way, in this poetic way, would have been new to them. So I can't recommend this enough. So if you haven't ventured into ancient literature, this is definitely one that you should consider. And if you do like epic poetry and you never have read the Aeneid yet, well, you should. What's holding you up? And it also gives you a better idea of Roman culture. If you wanted to have some more background, suppose you are an avid Bible reader and then you are interested in the New Testament, and of course you recognize that the New Testament takes place within a Roman context, then you would want to read this and understand that context even better, because Romans would have known this story very well, even what Vergil had written by the time you have the New Testament writers writing their epistles and the Gospels. So just a really interesting book. This was a cultural touchstone for the Romans, and fragments of the Aeneid in manuscript form were found along Hadrian's Wall, and that's in England. So this story traveled. And then for centuries afterwards, after the Roman Empire, this was popular with people in the West. And for understanding where Western culture even came from, this would be one of the books you would want to read. All right, that's about all I have to say for now. Just highly recommend the Aeneid, and hope you take some time to read it. All right, I'll see you later.